right, so today, guys, we're going to go through, and one thing I've been getting a lot of questions on through social media stuff, as we've talked about this in a lot of these past episodes, and a lot of people want a little more detail, is this deficient specific training that we've talked about and mentioned. And at the point where you guys that have interned for us have been here watching our program now, you haven't necessarily seen a lot of the actual specification program with the deficiencies. What you guys have seen is a lot of the data collection and kind of the lead up into it. So I'm going to just kind of walk through how we use it. And obviously we're growing through it, every day. And it's definitely grown, year by year as we've really started doing. And I would say the first year we really started, using this idea of deficient specific training was 2015. 2014 was the really bare bones start of it. But how the program's evolved since 2014, and at least running it wise has really been continuing to add the multi-layers of this. So as we go, I think that's probably the best place to start, is to really talk about the multiple layers of our program through the development process of our guys. So, to start off the first and the second tier, or really the first and second layer of our programs, right, is when guys first get on campus, we have the foundational program. And that's kind of the first tier, the first card of our program. And then you have the developmental tier, the developmental layer of our program. Now, in our program, if you guys know this or not, since I've hired Coach Heiss and had him here, he oversees those directly. So, Coach Heiss has worked with me for a long time. He knows my expectations, and as he writes those programs, his ideology and what he's trying to do is he's preparing them in the foundational program for the developmental program. The developmental program, or that layer, is the idea is to get you ready for the team card, or kind of what our standard program is. And then from there is where we get into the specification program, of where you really see a lot of our mainly juniors and seniors, upperclassmen, who go into this deficient specific program. So to really start, Heiss, why don't you just kind of briefly walk us through that foundational and developmental program, and some of your thought processes as you write through those to prepare them for what is a standard card. And then I'll take over at the team card and talk about some of the testing we do to get them ready for that specification deficient specific program.
Yeah. So, I mean, the foundational program is a lot of what we actually spoke about in a staff meeting 2 days ago, where we talked about it. So for your first 2 weeks on campus, and we're learning more about you than probably you're learning from us. We're watching how you move. We're seeing pretty much that. We're watching how you move. We're doing body weight exercises. Can you hold these split squat isometrics in a good position without knee valgus? And that's the foundation. The foundational part is relative strength. Can you own your body weight? Can you do good chin-ups? So those things. We're not worried about loading you or getting stronger at that moment in time. It's figuring out what your availability is to go train. Maybe it's none. Maybe you're a freshman offensive lineman and you can't do a push-up. Well, that's really good to know before we go throw a bar above your face on a bench press. And so that to me is the goal of the foundation. It's to learn about the athlete, and it's to start to teach them your way. And so I know we're really talking about training right now, but it's also a really good point to kind of emphasize your standard or your way over training at that moment in time. If part of your standard, like ours is here at UB, is to have your dumbbells set back on the rack with the horns facing up. If they don't do that during the workout, we'll handle that right now, because that's more important to getting them to understand how we train, how we take care of our things, the standard we have, than it is to go ahead and load up a back squat. That's not the goal of the foundational program. And so then as you move out of the foundational program into the developmental program, it's basically what Coach Sleeve just said. It's preparing you to train in this program. Preparing you with the movements you'll need for athletic development success for the next 4 to 5 years in this program. We're going to do really, excuse using the same word again, but foundational movements. We're going to front squat. We are going to neutral grip chin up. We are going to start to learn isometric clean position holds. And we're going to do, some really easily to learn posterior chain and just get some bang for your buck. We're starting to build the base of what you're going to be training with for the next 5 years. The way I look at it is if if you come into this program in July and you are not ready in January, February to be on our team card or our standard program, then we probably haven't really done our job that well. We're not talking about needing to accelerate your training age by any means, but I want you to be movement competent in the weight room. Coming out of that developmental or non-travel or whatever you want to call it, that biggest block of training that we have, that's the goal.
Yeah. So, going back through that, guys, we kind of have two main goals of that foundational program, which is like Coach High said, is number one, it's just to assess. These are kids these are always, you go right in the foundational program right when you get on campus. So they're kids we've never seen. We have no idea what they've done in their past. We have no idea what their training age is. We have no idea what their training level is. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to assess, and we can do that through a multitude of movements. And then the next real big thing is just to ingrain, right? We want to ingrain two things, really: great movement patterns, and we want to start to ingrain our culture. So that time, that foundational program is a great time to do those things. Now, to be more specific on what Coach Heiss was saying, you guys got to remember, I'm not a timeline-based coach. I'm a milestone-based coach. So while the foundational program can last a week for some guys, right? We'll put them in that program, and there's been classes that we've had that just get it right away, and we don't need to spend a lot of time really separating them and really implementing cultural specific things with them. They get it. They can roll right into the team and do those things. And there's other groups that have been there for 8 weeks of a summer program. And then there's groups that have finished that 8 weeks and gone into what typically should be the developmental program, but they still need foundational movements or that foundational structure, I should say, and they stay in it. So it's all milestone based. We've had kids that have been in that for 3 days. We have kids that have been in it for 3 months. It just depends. So as they reach the milestone of really what we're looking at from an objective standpoint is the entire foundational program is outlined and has specific, like Coach said, relative strength milestones that have to be reached. A certain amount of push-ups per your body weight, a certain amount of chin-ups per your body weight. We're looking for more subjective qualities of movement as far as, can they do these movements efficiently? Are they ready to load these movements? What is their GPP? What is their general fitness? Are they ready? Can they handle a program safely? If we put them into a developmental program where there are a lot of higher reps, a lot of more challenging things, can they safely handle those things? So those are some of the objective things that we're looking for in that foundational program, to some of those objective milestones that they need to reach. And then when we get into the developmental program, like I said, there's a lot of things to that, but you have to understand the kind of athlete you're typically working with. We want to use very simplistic baseline stimulus to try to achieve optimal results from those guys. And at that point in their career, their training ages are so low that we can do very simple movements and get those. So the thing is really just being savagely great at those simplistic movements is what we're trying to work in that developmental program, where we don't use a lot of sexy things like chains and bands and sleds. That's not the point of the developmental program. It is to build a great structure. And what we're looking to do is, we're looking to develop general strength. We want to solidify those movement patterns, obviously under load now. And I think the third biggest thing that we need to think about is, it is our longest opportunity to really train these guys. For these guys are not playing football games, so they've just theoretically they've come off a 6 to 8 week foundational program. If I'm giving you guys general timelines, which is summer training when they first get on campus, they're going to redshirt, so they're not going to play on Saturdays, so they're practicing. But it's really, guys, it's almost 30 weeks. It can be up to 30 weeks of uninterrupted training. This is, to me, one of the most pivotal times in the guy's career. And it's what Coach High said. If we've trained a kid for 30 weeks and he's not prepared to go up to the team card in January, we need to talk about a few things. One, are we recruiting the right kind of athletes? Are these kids coachable? And a lot of times what you find is the guys that aren't prepared are the guys that are not coachable. And then also we need to evaluate our program. Is our program really doing the correct things to get them ready for this? So as they get done with those things and we feel like these guys have built and developed great general strength, we feel like they've really solidified these motor patterns to where we're not having to break down their squat and clean, and they can pick a bar up and they know these movements now. They're ready for that team card is what we see. And we have some parameters as far as strength and where they are and what we're looking for graduation of that developmental program, but then we'll shift them into the team card. Okay. And the team card and kind of what our standard card is it's a program that it's still a general program from a standpoint of the general qualities that athletes or football players need to develop to be successful in our sport. That's going to hit on all of those things. And it's what would be, like I said, our prototypical program. So we're working all ends of the spectrum of the force velocity curve. We're exposing them to some sexier things now. They're using chains, they're using bands, but they're doing what we would see. I would call more generalization. So over the 8 years that I've been in this conference, this MAC conference of coaching these kind of athletes, this level of athlete, their general qualities that obviously I see these athletes need more than not. Okay. Now through that team card, through that as guys are going into that standard card, that team card, we start collecting a lot of data, and we start really, and not that I don't want to say that, let me take that back. We don't start, we've always been doing it. At this point, we probably have a pretty freaking good idea. The point is probably at this point, they're not prepared for specialization. They're not prepared. They don't need to have deficiency specific training to adapt, because there's so many qualities that they still need to develop. There's so many underdeveloped qualities that specializing on one would detour too much from the other qualities that it wouldn't put us in a successful position. So there's a level of where we need to drive all these qualities in the right direction, and then we can start to really pick apart one particular quality, right? If a running back's running a 4.840 and his acceleration is slow and his top end speed is slow, well, isolating just one of them isn't obviously going to be a smart move. So for that team card, the idea is that we take all those qualities and we really start to try to develop and move those up the curve. Okay. So team card, that's a general concept, right? And now we get into this idea of deficiency specific training. Okay. So early on in my career, I would say that was probably the start of, or somewhere near there of this idea of foundation of functional training, right? That was really the era of when things got really hot with doing single leg squats on BOSU balls. And if it doesn't, really taking these rehabilitation type movements and trying to load them and call them functional training. Where coaches really tried to mimic sport movement in the weight room and say that would cross over to the football field. Okay. That was when that really became a thing. Now that never really made sense to me, right? Because at the end of the day, there's nothing that we do in the weight room that's football. It's the qualities that we develop in the weight room that transfer to football that have the biggest translation into our sport or into sports in general. So, trying to mimic a DB drop, a loaded defensive back drop back in a particular kind of step, or a BOSU ball, single arm, left leg, elevated press, those things that just never made sense to me on how that would help anything transfer to the field. I always thought more, qualitative than I did think of a standpoint of specification. So as I started really looking at athletes, what I found is initially what it was is we had a lot of really strong athletes early on in Akron. I thought our strength numbers were really, really good, but I didn't think that our on-field movement was great. And this is when, what you guys saw me talk about changing direction. There's a lot of pieces that go into this puzzle. But it ended up being, there's a whole piece of the curve that we weren't training. It was as I was just kind of getting into velocity-based training and understanding the importance of training both ends of the curve. And, coming up, I had always heard, you increase your squat, you're going to increase your speed, and that's all you need to worry about. And I think that's probably how I attack things. So, the first thing that we implemented is we just started implementing a lot of velocity-based training back in 2014. We got Tendo units, and we started dynamic box band speed squat, and we started doing, we started lightening the cleans, and we started moving for speed. And just from that first original 2014, that first kind of original just addition of just adding in a lot of those velocity-based movements, our average 40 in that summer dropped over a tenth and a half of a second. Our average vertical jump in that 8-week program, our average was up 3 inches, and I think we had 13 guys that increased their vertical jump 6 inches or more. So that really jumped out to me and just made my brain start thinking in a whole different direction of how we needed to train an athlete in general. And that kind of led to a different, I would say, team card. But so to break down this further for people that aren't very well versed on this stuff. So we kind of talk about 2 athletes. We talk about, well, I guess 3, an athlete A, athlete B, and athlete AB. Okay. So athlete A is an athlete who is very, very strong. He can produce a lot of force, right? He's a guy that can take a squat. He can squat 600 pounds, and he is a very strong guy. Like you would think like a power lifter type athlete. But he gets to the football field and it doesn't translate, doesn't cross over. It seems like he can't express that force on the field. And there's a reason for that. On the field, you think about how long and how slow a squat takes, right? Well, you don't have nearly that much time on a football field. 10th of a second, you have to potentiate as much force as you can. So that's 1 rep squat, that heavy, slow squat doesn't translate if the rate coding or that muscle doesn't know how to, those neurons don't know how to fire in the right and the correct speed to produce that force. So you end up getting athlete A, who's super, super strong, but goes on the field and can't express that strength. Okay. Then you have athlete B, who's on the complete other end of the spectrum. He's a guy that, back squats 225, and that's his max. He just doesn't have strength. He's very, very weak, but he's super elastic. He can jump out of the gym. He's like I said, reactive elastic, and he's a guy that can produce all the force that he can produce in that time frame he can produce it all. The problem is it's just not a lot of force. And so you have a underdeveloped kind of weak athlete, which is athlete B. And then athlete AB is who we talk about being a very well balanced athlete, which is what we try to develop. So not too far up on any end of the spectrum. He's got a very, very high squat. He's high on the spectrum. He can produce that force very quickly. So he can express all that strength on the football field. So he has a lot of strength and he knows how to express it. That's a well-balanced athlete. Is going to be pretty efficient and have a lot of translation to everything we train in the weight room, sprinting on the field, and cross it over into the game of football or whatever game it is that athlete might be playing. Okay. So there's 2 terms here, Boyne, that we talk about, right? We talk about explosive strength deficit. And we talk about muscle strength deficit, or sometimes you'll hear me say elastic strength deficit or muscle strength deficit. What are the difference between the 2?
Explosive strength is the guy is not able to produce in the sense of power, so force and speed. And then the other one, the muscular, is just the guy's not strong. He just can't move the weight.
Yep. So those are kind of the first 2 categories that we'll start shifting guys into, in this program. So as we go and we're really starting to assess guys, we feel like generally we're in a very good place. We'll start to look, is one end of that curve, is this particular athlete have a deficiency? Is he elastically strength deficient? Is he muscularly strength deficient? And where on the curve does that lie? Okay. Now in recent years, and I'd say this is probably in the last 1.5 to 2 years, a new category, or what I would say is we really see this deficiency across the board. So we really work it generally, but it's reactiveness as well, right? So we talk about, and you guys have heard me talk about this, how important the rigidity to the foot ankle complex is, and the calf soleus complex, and the rigidity of that. What we talk about is reactivity, right? You could have a very explosive, strong athlete, but if they lack reactivity or rigidity of that ankle foot complex, you will notice that athlete will dissipate force through the ground over and over and over again, and you'll be beating your head through a door wondering why our athlete's not transferring. And a lot of that can simply be lost right at the foot, right at the ankle, right at the calf soleus complex. And so those are things that I would say that's the 3rd category of what we are starting to develop and go through. It's just we're still really working on that reactivity with how we want to quantify it, how we want to make it objective versus just, I personally think that that's the easiest one to see. When you see an athlete who just can't keep rigidity into the ground when their foot strikes the ground, I think it's super easy to see that force just literally just kind of mush into the ground. And so, that's one thing that we've really, really hit hard as of late and kind of added into the third category. So really those are the three main deficient specific things that we will work and train with athletes. So as I get into that fourth card, right, that is where we'll break them up. So you'll pretty much go into three, or possibly, like I said, you can be, whatever. You may be explosive strength deficient, you may be muscular strength deficient, and you could also be reactive strength deficient, and what we kind of term that ankle complex area and that rigidity area. So you can sometimes be in a few different boxes, but so more or less we'll put you into those. So how do we determine this, right? There's a few different ways. So we use the poor man's version of the reactive strength index. We don't have force plates, and I think that's one thing, guys, that I will challenge you to do is don't wait until you have the resources to be around those things to learn about them. Don't have the first time you get a assistant job at Alabama or the head job at Florida State and can afford to use force plates. Don't have that be the first time that you investigate them and look into exactly what they can do and what they are. Educate yourself now. I think that's one thing that I it's challenging for me too, because I've been so used to, like I said, I've been in the MAC conference for 8 years now, where we have a lower budget and we have to find unique ways of getting around things. So sometimes I think of, the Omega Wave, it's out of the question. We can't use it. I'm not going to learn about it. Force plates, couldn't afford those. Those aren't in the budget. GPS, can't afford that. Don't forget about that. And so you put this huge gap in how you understand things and the lenses that you would see things through. So learn about those things right now, and don't be afraid to study those things just because you can't technically or necessarily afford them, because you never know, right? Last year, Coach McNally, what did we get? Well, we got 12 GPS catapult units, and thank God Coach McNally and myself at that point in time had familiarized ourselves with them, more so from a standpoint of actually using them, Coach McNally than I, but understanding how to use that data and what that data meant, it allowed for a much smoother transition. So but anyways, guys, so some of the ways that we use them, right? A poor man's RSI. So what we use, guys, is one of the main things we do is we use a reactive strength index, jump system, right? So for the vertical jump, we have the jump mats, the just jump mats. Now we will use these to collect data, and once again, guys, this is completely anecdotal. From a standpoint of how we use this, but it works really well for us. Okay, so we will test 3 different jumps, right? So we will test first a static vertical jump. So this is more testing muscular strength, right? We take the elasticity out of the jump. There is no stretch reflex. We have them snap down into a squat. We have them hold that squat for 3 seconds to allow all the force, all the energy built up in those tendons to dissipate. And so we're relying just on muscle, right? Or mostly muscle. And then we'll measure that jump. We'll get that number. We'll write it down. Then we'll do a counter movement jump. So athlete will start tall. Now we're using some elasticity, right? We're going to snap down. We're going to snap up immediately and test and measure that vertical jump. And then we're going to do an overloaded counter movement. So what could be a depth jump, right? So we can obviously manipulate this a few different ways, but we'll start on the box, typically a 6 to 12 inch box, depending on position. We'll drop off of that box, we'll overload that elasticity, that stretch reflex, and we will jump from there. Okay, so we take those 3 jumps, and obviously if you're talking about a balanced athlete and you're thinking about this logically, right, which jump should be the lowest if you are a balanced, efficient athlete?
All right, the static jump.
Okay, well, while you're figuring out, I'm going to keep on rolling here so we don't have a... Yes, correct. So the static jump, because you don't have the tendon helping you out, right? So you're using less force productive qualities to be able to do it. That makes sense, right? So the static jump should be the lowest. Obviously, the counter movement jump should be a little higher, and the overloaded counter movement jump should be the highest. Okay, so as we go through that, the ratio, or what I would say, what I look for is about an inch different in each. What I've noticed anecdotally is that those things, like I said, those 3 jumps, when there's about an inch difference between the 3 of them, you have a pretty freaking well-balanced athlete. And it doesn't happen very often, I'll tell you that. This is pretty glaring to see, where you may see an athlete with a 24-inch, you have an athlete with a 24-inch static jump, 27.5-inch counter movement jump, and a 28-inch overloaded counter movement jump, and that can go vice versa. And obviously, if you're more explosive athletes, you can see up to 3-inch swings. Well, that becomes very apparent, guys, of what their deficiency is. Obviously, if you are statically jumping higher than you are an overloaded counter movement or a counter movement jump, you are not very good at being elastic. Your body does not understand those qualities very well. So that's one of the ways we do it. We can do the same thing with a broad jump, right? If I do a static versus an overload, or versus a counter movement versus an overloaded, I can measure those as well. We can do repetitive broad jumps, right? If I just do 3 broad jumps, I do a broad jump, jump out, stand up, reset, do another one, and measure that distance, however far that was. Okay, let's say that was 14 yards. Right. And then I just, okay, now we're going to do 3 rapid fire jumps. So now we're obviously overloading that tendon. We're using much more elastic properties. And then we do 3 in a row, 1, 2, 3. If those 3 rapid fire broad jumps aren't further than those 3 static broad jumps, it probably means you have some elastic deficiencies. Okay. Now another one that we've been looking at a lot, talking with, Cam Joss and going through some of these different splits. You can break down a 40-yard split to see where a guy is, right? Obviously, the first 10 yards, guys, of a sprint or the acceleration phase, that relies a little heavier on muscle. Whereas you get more upright and we're sprinting more and more vertical force and projection in the ground, it becomes much more of a reactive movement or an elastic movement. So what we can take is we have estimations that we can take and measure a guy's first 10 yards or a 10-yard split, and then we can measure a fly-in 10, which we do this quite often, right? Now, if the first 10 yards acceleration, let's say that 10-yard split is indicative of a 4.40, very good first 10-yard split. It is a fast, explosive, very good projected 10-yard split. And it tells us, okay, this guy's going to run a 4.40. And then we do a fly-in 10 where we give him 30 yards to build speed and measure that last 10 yards of the 40, or that fly-in 10. And let's say that's indicative of a 4.740. What deficiency would he have, Coach McNally?
I'd say he'd be elastic deficient.
Right? He would be elastically deficient. Why? Because he can express good muscular strength in that acceleration. He can produce a lot of force, but when he has to be reactive, when he gets upright, he's obviously limited there. So those are some of the ways that we will measure and quantify the reactive strength index, or what we do with how we categorize these guys into the different deficiencies, the different deficient specific programs. Okay. Now, and I'm being pretty general here, guys, and then we can have some dialogue and questions at the end here, but I just want to get this all out in kind of chronological order here now of how this makes sense to me. So once I've walked you through the 4 foundational layers of our program, right? Talking to you about how we evaluate and how we measure these poor man reactive strength index, and to go back to where I was is force plates and things like that are obviously the most accurate way to do these things. It's just, this is what we have. These are poor man's ways of doing it. And for us, like, it works freaking awesome. It really, really does, guys. It's simple. It's inexpensive. For part of that, all you need is a stopwatch. For the broad jump version, you need nothing. Okay. You can get creative and find different ways to do it with the vertical jump way as well. Okay. But now let's talk about the applied version of this, how this becomes applicable. Okay. So first off, I don't think it would be efficient to have 30 guys in a weight room doing 30 different specification exercises based off their deficiency. So what we do is we categorize these guys. Typically with our athletes, that works out very well. You may have in your top tier, those guys, you got to remember our program, we're running 4 at once. So in that very top tier, the guys who are prepared and ready for the deficiency specific program, you're talking probably your top 30 guys, right? Maybe 25 guys. And then out of those 25 guys, you break these guys down into, maybe it's 10 guys, 8 guys in each one of these categories. So what would look like is, let's say on a Friday, we have a squat programmed. Okay. Well, everyone's still going to squat. It's just the variation of that squat might change. Okay. So if you are a strength deficient athlete, what are we going to do? We're going to work more eccentrics and more isometrics. So what we might do is while you're squatting, okay, you might do a 5x5 eccentric, 2 tempo down, 3-second pause, 2 tempo up. You might do a very much so strength driven workout to where we're trying to isolate that muscular strength deficient. Okay. Now where my other side of the weight room, they might be doing the elastic strength deficient training block. So they might be doing 10 sets of 2 box band speed squats. Okay. Or we might be doing heavy reversals. So this is where this blew me away, guys. This is something I want to talk about the other day, is listening to Stu McMillan the other day on a podcast. And I don't know, maybe he didn't mean to say this before, but this spoke to me like crazy. Was he said the most transferable exercise that he has seen cross over to the track in his entire career, which you guys remember, he's been doing this forever, and he's one of the better minds in our industry, is overloaded eccentrics. Is more or less where we take out the eccentric, so it's just a freaking drop under the bar. And I can't remember exactly percentages or what the protocol was for the movement, but just to me, I'm like, man, that's because I've seen very similar things. Is one thing that you'll see guys who have this elastic strength deficiency is we'll obviously drop the percentages down, but we'll put some pretty solid resistance on that bar via bands, and we'll do a rapid reversal. So we will, obviously these are guys that are very technically sound. They've been in our program for 4 to 5 years, so they can handle this. You shouldn't be doing this with guys that can't handle this for sure, but we will do a rapid reversal. So they'll take those bands, and the idea is that you want to let those bands pull you down faster than you can go down on your own. So it's not, it's yes, you are letting those bands snap you down. Now, you're still always in control of the bar, but that rapid reversal obviously makes it an extremely elastic movement. So there's another example of something that why this side of the group who is muscularly strength deficient may be doing isometric squats. The other side may be doing these heavy rapid reversals that are elastic deficient. So that's one of the applicable ways of how we'll do this. Obviously, within our sprinting, if a guy is more muscularly strength deficient, we could do more things like heavy sled sprints. We could do more things where we isolate the acceleration phase. If a guy is elastically deficient, we could do more things like wickets and more fly-in tens, more ankle hops and the pogo jumps and things to really work reactivity. In our plyometric program, right, we'll isolate this. So we'll always superset this with our power cleans. So everybody might be power cleaning, right? If you are a elastically deficient athlete, you'll go do hurdle hops. If you are a strength deficient athlete, you'll go do a seated box jump, okay? From a standpoint of neurological responses as well, we'll do this, right? So we'll do overspeed jumps where we're trying to really attack things at the neuromuscular level and really try to once again speed up that reversal piece of things. So there's a lot of ways that we can apply this, and that's obviously a ton of things that I just threw at you. I hope that was as organized as I could make that, just speaking off the top of my head. Heis or Connor, if you guys have ways that I can clean that up, or if you guys want me to go into more depth about things that you guys have, why don't you fire those at me?
I think maybe one thing you could touch on too is just talking about how we utilize different velocity zones with some primary movements. Maybe that'd be some good discussion point.
Yeah, so and kind of that's a really, really big thing, because that's one huge thing that I miss too, guys, is you have to understand is what makes an athlete so special is different for different athletes. Okay, so let's say there's an athlete that his strength is what makes him so special. Well, if all of a sudden you go, oh, because he's so strong and his strength is so good, he's such a good accelerator, we're going to ignore that completely, and we're only going to train the other end of the spectrum. Okay, that is devastatingly a poor decision. All right, you have to constantly, because if you don't train that, what you'll notice is you're taking away your athlete's biggest strength. What makes him so special, you stop training it. Okay, and then all of a sudden, what happens to their performance? What do you think happens? It goes down. They actually get worse. So with this deficiency specific training, you have to be very careful. And guys, what Coach McNally is saying, and this is a huge point to understand, is we are constantly still training all ends of the spectrum. These are very minute little changes that we will make that make big differences, but we can't just completely ignore things. You are still constantly getting that, what I want to say that team card is, right? The general principle of developing all ends of the curve, or as Coach McNally said, of working different speeds and different speed zones, whether it's strength, speed, strength, accelerator strength, absolute strength. We're still training all those zones. It's just we're going to pour a little bit more coffee into the mug of elastically strength deficient if that's what you need, or muscular strength deficient if that's what you need. But you can't just sit there and go, aha, this makes sense. If he's elastic strength deficient, we're just going to train that and it'll make everything better. Those qualities, guys, if they are untrained, they go away, they dissipate. And then you make your athlete who loves doing these things that make him so good, you take those things away from him. And one, you probably make him hate training because you don't let him do the things that he actually enjoys doing. And then two, you diminish the qualities that make him such a special athlete.
And I think, Coach Sleep, to touch on something that, I mean, you mentioned the Stuart McMillan podcast, not to really be an advertisement for that one, although it is really good listen. I think one interesting point he brought up was talking about if you are so narrowed in on your focus of doing deficiency-based stuff and you never touch on the things that make your athletes special, think about from like a psychological perspective. If you have a velocity deficient athlete, let's say, and you're working up to a major competition and you're only doing like force enhancing things, well, if he's very, or she is very poor at those, right? Like think about from a mental perspective. Now, all of a sudden, oh man, I'm getting in my own head. I suck at doing these activities and stuff. Maybe that starts playing with the psychological stuff. And of course there's some give and take, and maybe that's more applicable to those at the highest of the high level, maybe not so much at our level, but I think it creates some really interesting dialogue in terms of how do we want to have that balance of giving them what they need and what they're deficient in, but then also giving them stuff that gives them confidence. I think I heard it from Joe Ken many years ago, is the number one most transferable trait that you can have in a program is confidence, right? So if you are depleting them of that, are you doing a disservice? And I don't know the answer to it. I think it just creates some interesting dialogue. And like you said, I mean, you gotta not necessarily completely neglect certain things, but it just what do you emphasize in your program, really?
It's another really, really good point, Coach. And this is one thing we talk about in our program all the time is that, in January and February, we're not nervous to break these guys down a little bit. We're not afraid to challenge their confidence and really tell them what they need to really work at and get after them a little bit. We're not afraid to make our team understand, hey, we're not all that. We need to really get going here. But I will tell you that in June and July, we are very, very intentional about what Coach just said, which is building confidence. That's from two standpoints. One is a team, right? We want them to think they're the closest, bonded, tightest knit group of guys we've ever coached. We want, whether it's true or not, we will start instilling that confidence. Like, man, you guys have put the freaking work in. No one's worked harder than you. Those are essential to put forth. Okay. And same thing. I think what a lot of times what you see is you get into the end of that summer, guys peak all over the place. Some guys, it might be supposed to be a reload week and all of a sudden they're peaking, and other guys, sometimes it might be supposed to be a peak week and they're like, they need a reload. And you need to be very conscious of how you manipulate that and how you manage guys' psyches, because you don't want the week going into camp for a guy to be kind of touching over training and feeling not the best. So you got to be very careful with those things. And I think that's a really good point, Coach, as well, as through all this is a psychology of building confidence. And as you get closer to playing football, your guys need to have extreme confidence in themselves and in their football team or whatever team it is that they may have. Both very, very good points. Coach Heiss, we've got about 10, 15 more minutes here. What else do you think we need to touch on here? Anything or any questions or additions you have?
No, I mean, my biggest thing I had was what Connor was brought up initially when you asked for any questions, was talking about some of the velocity zones and how we pair those. I mean, something maybe to go into too is from position to position, maybe touch on what we did with our second lower body day with the big boys in the summer, adding in another dynamic effort movement for those guys and kind of taking out that second that second day. So what we can talk through that for a minute or two. It might be really good.
Great call on that, Coach. So, while I was, downplaying position specific work, we still obviously there are some things that you should do and you should consider when it comes to that. In general, this is the general way I answer this question is the closer you are to the ball, the longer time you're going to spend in that absolute strength, accelerative strength type velocities specific zone. The further you are away from the ball, the more time you'll spend in the strength, speed, strength type zone on the force velocity curve. So things that we'll do is with big boys especially, I think that they need to be exposed to everything just like anybody else does. You need to be very conscious and aware of trying to limit the impact on joints for those guys. It's a lot more body weight. Obviously, every step they take it's a lot more force that has to be produced and absorbed. So you have to really consider those things. So one thing that we will do is where skills and mids may be doing a deficient specific jump, what our big boys will do is they'll go in the weight room and we might do a different dynamic effort lift, right? So you might have your 3 sprint stations that we'll do prior to a lower body lift day, where the mids and the skills are out there and they'll do a projection drill, they'll do a production drill, and then they'll do a plyometric drill. And the bigs would only do 2 of those, and then they would head to the weight room and they might do a dynamic effort box band speed squat or deficiency specific speed squat. So it could be a box band for a guy who's more muscular strength deficient. It could be just a heavy reversal band squat for a guy who is more elastically deficient, or a trap bar deadlift, a banded trap bar deadlift, right? Where we're working and we might isolate that accelerative strength zone. We know that in from a standpoint of combat, of hand-to-hand combat, or accelerating through an external force, that accelerative strength zone is the best zone for that. So we might isolate that as well. So there's still some position specific things going on, to say the least. And I think that the main thing we're trying to do is we're just trying to limit the impact on those bigger athletes' joints and really be intelligent about how we're doing those things as we go through this deficiency specific training modality. What else do you have, Heis?
Nothing too specific. I mean, that was the 2 biggest things that I thought we should have covered, were what Connor brought up and what we just talked about with the second dynamic effort day in the weight room for the big boys, and how it's not necessarily position specific, but it's athlete specific, right? It's the demands of their position in the game and what that allows for. So I know we don't have a ton of time, but they might maybe answer some questions from our interns here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think right before we get into that is, another thing to really consider is, people say, well, why do your bigs need a top end sprint sleeve? Why do you do that? Why do you top end sprint your bigs? They don't do that in the game of football. Well, guys, let me break down for you. Is there anything that we do in the weight room that they do in football? You ever see a guy put a bar on his back and squat on the field? You ever see a guy do a power clean on the field? Do you ever see a guy do any of those things on the field? And the answer is no. So once again, our philosophy that we do here, it's about developing qualities, not necessarily specific movements that transfer to the field. We develop the qualities to allow them to learn how to use those qualities in their positions on the field is the whole point, guys. They're the experts at football. We're the experts at developing qualities. Let's both do what our jobs are. So yeah, I think there are still a lot of benefits to upright sprinting, which that's a question that I got via social media for bigs. Now, do they need to be sprinting 40 yards down the field and doing it over and over again? Absolutely not. But it's certainly something we can expose them to as well. So that being said, yeah, interns, guys, anything that you guys have questions about on any of this, go ahead and fire away, and we'll try to wrap this up here in about the next 10 minutes. So we got some good time here for some questions. Yep, go ahead.
Right off the bat, I mean, when it comes to programming the deficiency specific training, my immediate thought is like, just logistically, how would you set that up in the weight room? Like you've got, say, your tier 1 guys, and you've got bigs, mid, skills, and you're trying to keep the flow of a workout going. Like you don't want anyone to be hung up on one thing while the rest of the group is moving on to the next block. I would assume that you would have, say, 3 different plyometric stations set up for the guys to superset with whatever training they're currently doing. And it's probably not at the forefront of your mind right now, but, just provide an example of how you would segment the different training within the workout so as not to hang up the workout or delay anything, to keep everyone on the same page and moving along.
Yeah, it's definitely situational is what I'll say. And we can do things a lot differently here than what I could do at Akron. Having 2 full-time coaches here that are football only allow us to do some very unique things that we weren't able to do at Akron. But, we'll train these guys in tiers for that reason. So, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, those 4 different layers, they train completely separately. So that gives us much more eyes to do these things with. That being said, like I said, we try to keep this as generally as where Coach McNally might take all the elastic deficient guys in the weight room, whereas Coach Heiss would take all the reactive strength guys in the weight room. And then I could take all the muscular strength deficient guys in the weight room. And that would be how we would split it up, so that you're only coaching those 8 guys with that specific deficiency and going from there.
Now, would you say you're doing block A and we're coming in and everyone's going to be squatting? Are you supersetting the deficient, exercise of the elastic, all that, with a block, or is it its own block itself?
Yeah, so it just alterates and substitutes, right? So where you see on the team card, it might say back squat 5x5 at 80 whatever percent, and that everybody in that group would be doing that. The only difference is on the elite card, or that deficiency specific card, it would just, on block A, it would just say squat variation. And then, it would be broken into those categories. Coach McNally's guys might be doing a box band speed squat. Coach Heiss's guys might be doing a heavy reversal or a rapid reversal band squat. And my guys might be doing eccentric or pause squats.
Okay. On top of their already, meat and potato squat work.
No, that replaces it. That is their squat
Gotcha.
work.
Gotcha.
Now we would always keep so if we're gonna squat in some form or fashion twice a week, while like Coach McNally said, we're still going to keep that general squat, right? So we can't just do explosive strength training now with that group. They still need exposure to maximum strength. So we coin certain days for deficiency specific training, not every day, because if we did it every day, they would never have exposure to the other ends of the curve. So there's certain days in the program that we say, okay, this is a deficiency specific day, and it might be different, right? So Monday it might be that they might follow that general card, but there is a deficiency specific plyometric inserted. Whereas Friday or Thursday might be, we change that squat pattern to deficiency specific, but they do a general plyometric with it. And that's just an example, right? But so we sprinkle it in, and obviously we use a little bit of vertical integration, a little bit of micro dosing, to where they have an exposure to everything every day. They might do an explosive strength, bilateral squat, and they might superset it with a maximal strength lateral lunge after, so just to give an example. So we're still very cognizant about hitting all ends of the curve. But you got to remember, right, especially in the summertime, which is really when we get into this deficiency specific stuff, you only have so much room to pour that coffee into that coffee cup, and you can overflow it very quickly. And if you just add, you can't just add, right? Adding doesn't work. If you just add, you overtrain, you create injuries. You have to substitute. So if you're going to put something in, what's coming out. And that's where, yeah, like I said, everything is a sacrifice to something else. You decide to do more of this, well, you're taking away from that. And so you have to highly consider that as you're doing this, because that's what it is. It is a substitution. It is not an addition. If you just go, hey, I'm going to add all this defensive specific training to my program, you're going to also add injuries, add illness, and add shitty results. So substitute, you got to sub it in.
Yep.
Anything else, guys?
I know you said for the vertical jumps, the differences between each jump should be about an inch. But is there an optimal amount for the 40-yard sprint and the flying 10s or the horizontal jumps?
Yeah, so we use a chart for the 40s out, and what we're looking for is we're just looking for balance. So once again, we have a chart that you take their first 10, and so as you remember, right, when the guys got back, we start with all 10s, right? So we'll measure those 10s. Well, those 10s will spit out an estimated 40 for us, right? We have that formula of what that estimated 40 is, and then same thing, the back 10 or that flying 10, that gives us an estimation, right? So if those aren't within 0.05 of each other, so for example, if one says, hey, he should run a 4.44, and the other one says he should run a 4.45, I'm okay with that discrepancy. If it's anything larger than that, that's when I would say that we have a deficiency. If a guy's 40 is indicative of, his 10 is indicative of a 4.4, and his top 10, his fly-in 10 is indicative of a 4.5, that's a discrepancy, and then that's a deficiency, and we will train that. As far as the jumps, you're looking for something substantial over a yard for the broad jumps, right? So if I'm going 14 yards with the static jumps or the resetted broad jumps, and then I go 15, 16 yards with the rapid fire, we're looking at a deficiency. Now, obviously, the larger those windows are, the larger our gap is. So, that points it out to us. And then you also have to understand that there's a lot of variables that go into that, right? Has a guy never done rapid fire broad jumps? Does a guy does not understand the movement? Has a guy, does he just not on the fly-in 10? Does a guy not know how to build up? Does he get to 27 yards and go, oh, I better start running, and hits the first yard of that final 10 at 90% speed? Well, obviously there's going to be a big discrepancy there. So sometimes you have to make sure you're actually being, you have to make sure you're coaching. You have to make sure that you understand that, hey, he clearly just doesn't understand the drill, not just automatically assume he has a deficiency, right? Because if a guy enters that final 10 of a flying 10 running 90% speed, well, there's going to be a huge discrepancy. You got to make sure they understand the drill. You got to make sure they understand that they're running it correctly. And that's with everything, right? There's always a learning curve with these things as well. So you have to understand that as well with these.
Coach Lee, you might
questions
jump in there for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Zal, I think it's a really good question to bring up, and just kind of building off Coach Lee's point. It was probably something I think we saw a lot with our overload counter movement jump last summer, at least. We would have guys that would improve. They'd go static 30 inches, counter movement 31 inches, and then like the overloaded counter when they step off the 12-inch box, hit the mat and jump, they'd be like 28 inches, right? And that might be the first week of the summer. Now, do you look at that and you say, man, this needs to be elastic deficient, like we need to completely throw out the program and include all that stuff? I don't think so necessarily. It's what Coach Lee's saying. The guy probably just didn't really understand how to do it, right? And then over the course of the next couple of weeks, all of a sudden that number starts trending in the direction you would expect it to. Are we magicians and, found out a way to add, 7 inches to this dude's overloaded jump? Well, we might have improved it a little bit, but I think a lot of it is probably just learning how to do that movement. And that's always just something with any kind of testing you do. If you test out your max clean on day one and nobody knows how to clean, you're going to have some really bad numbers, right? So you just got to be careful when you administer any kind of testing and stuff like that.
100%. All right, guys, I have an interview here at 9:30, so I gotta get going. But hopefully that at least will stimulate some thought. And like I said, I know a lot of the listeners had been asking for this, So, hopefully this will answer some of those questions that you guys had as well. Anybody who's listening to this and has questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And if there's anything specific that you want me to dive back into, send some questions and we can kind of do another Q&A where I can have Coach Ice or Coach McNally feed me some questions and I can try to answer them to the best of my ability. But hopefully that helps. Hopefully that at least gets your brain stimulating on this. And guys, this has been incredible for us. I can't tell you how much benefit you see out of an athlete when you really, keep their strength, but you work on their weakness and build it up as well. You really see a big impact on sports performance as well. So hopefully this stimulates some conversation. I appreciate everybody tuning in and listening. We'll see you next time.